Somebody once told me that there's like 9 meals till your population riots. If you miss 9 meals, things get gnarly. And in Singapore, when you import 90+% of all the food that's being eaten there, if you don't have a choice, somebody will make the choice for you, and that's bad. You want to make sure you have options and then decline an option. That's also fair. But you need to create options first before you can get into that decision making.
Hello, food chain. This is Sharon Chitton, and I'm a food tech junkie and innovation nerd who loves a good story. This podcast combines all my favorite vices into a deep dive about the problems our food system faces and the visionary people working on solutions. Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Daan Luining, co-founder of Meatable and a leader in the cultivated meat revolution. We'll dive into his journey from researcher to entrepreneur, the challenges of innovating in food production, and how ultimately Meatable is reshaping the industry. Are you ready? Let's get started, and don't forget to subscribe. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Sharon. How about yourself?
I'm great. Thank you. Well, I am very excited to learn more about Meatable. Before we dive into that, can you share a little bit about yourself, your journey, how you ended up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, of course. I would love to. So I'm just an average Dutch guy with a very hard to pronounce surname. I think in English it's Luining. So a lot of people don't get this right, but I've a background in cell molecular biology and tissue engineering. So I used to perform cell cultures and research on the lab. And about 10 years ago, I saw an opportunity to participate in a unique program, which was done in the southern provinces of the Netherlands. It's not very big, so it's like 2.5-hour drive from here, where a professor had the idea to create meat from cells. So by taking a small piece of an animal and using those cells to self-replicate, because that's what cells do.
Mm-hmm.
In already the short period that we have been conversing, we've already made millions of cells inside of our cells. But using that fundamental nature of cells, we made more cells of the cows and made muscle cells of it, and we turned it to a burger. And that spurred my career in this field, which has been an amazing journey, very humbled by standing in the beginnings of such a new field. And now I have my own company for about 6 years already.
Which, by the way, has done extraordinarily. If we look at, especially how maybe, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, about how the slower European.
You know what they say? Well, the Americans came up with slow and steady wins the race, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what are some of the challenges or pivotal moments that you faced early on, both in having a startup, but moreover into a field that is financially intensive, has a difficult regulatory process? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, you called it. It's all these things combined. The field is in between two spaces that normally don't collide with each other. It's in medical field from cell biology and tissue engineering and things that we discover or research for human health, but then crossing over into food science and the food space, which is a very uncomfortable for a lot of people position to be in. Since if you ask investors, producers, employees with certain skills to do cell biology, but then think about eating it, they think it's very strange and they don't really understand. But if you then ask the food people, like, hey, we're making just meat, and then talking about slaughtering or animal welfare, like, well, that's not the problem with us because we do it in a different way and they don't understand how we're doing it. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and we need to reach on both ends of the aisle to get people on board and help them understand that the way from cell biology, the way that we do things there are very expensive because medicine, people are willing to pay high prices for those type of things. Not so much for food, right? Food is relatively cheap if you look at on a cost basis compared to medicine. So educating investors, educating personnel, educating everyone basically to bring these two things together is challenging, especially for regulators.
Yeah.
New food is very scary for them, since if something happens with food, everybody eats. right? Everybody eats on a daily basis. So something wrong with that. There's a lot of exposure. So they're very cautious. They want to know what we're doing, how we're doing things, what's going on. And the way that we do things sometimes, give people some anxiety, like, oh, whoa, so you can actually eat the animal while sitting right next to you, having a jolly good life. Yeah, that's actually the case. You can do that. So it's all in a day's work. So I talking to people like you, help them understand that what we're doing is not so weird. It's new, and also it has a lot of benefits. We don't have to kill animals anymore. A lot of waste is prevented. A lot of feed the feed conversion is much better. This is all benefits that we can use in the future, especially since we are now with animal rearing at a production peak.
Yeah.
The amount of meat that we're producing is staggering. It's about 350 million tons every year, which is a crazy number. I don't even know how to visualize that, right? It loses all context. Like, I don't know how much 350 million tons is, but we're at this peak of productivity. More animals, squishing them closer together, better optimization. It doesn't seem that it will be sufficient for the amount of people that probably going to start eat meat in the next decade or so. The amount of people is growing. The amount of people that have access to meat is growing. So we need to have a more resilient food system, since if one aspect of it fails, you ask an Irish person how important it is to have more than one crops planted in your garden, right? The Irish potato famine was not a joke. So that's what we're all about. We try to create alternatives. We try to make sure that everybody has enough to eat and make a resilient food system by using a new method of producing the same thing that people apparently crave a lot. It doesn't seem to be slowing down the amount of meat people are eating. And for us, it's more of an and solution. And we have to start eating a little bit less meat, especially Western diets would benefit from eating a little less meat. And we should start developing more plant alternatives so we have more opportunity there, and cultivated meat, and all these things should be there.
Well, I want to dive into that a little bit, because on one end, I think when cultivated meat, but I would say the complementary protein movement came along, I think there was an error message, which was, this is how we're going to do things, and this is going to be the new normal. Which, yes, but you have existing farmers that you need to include in that change, right? It's never going to be, in my opinion, one or the other. It has to be, I always say we have a lot of tools in our toolbox and we have to use all of them, and we have to select which ones we have to use depending on which part of the world we are in, right? So one, there's that. And I think because it was sort of like that more exclusive and not inclusive conversation, it drove not people accepting, and I'm just saying even on a policy side, but sort of pushing back. And that's why you see these bans coming along, right? Which are based in misinformation. There's full of hormones, or basically whatever the actual intensive animal farming things are, whether it's hormones, antibiotics, they switched it to the cultivated space. So what's your take on this? And how do we move forward?
I completely agree with what you just said, especially on the fact that the narrative that has arisen from this conversation is us against the farmers, which is insane. Insane, because we cannot go without farmers anytime soon. This is a gradual process. This is not an app. This is not an iPhone. This is not something that very rapidly increases in volume and takes over a market. Food is such an incredibly complex and massive market that saying that people should change or should do this or should do that, doesn't seem to be working out. You need everybody on board to make such big changes like this. People's opinion on food is as diverse as the food that they're eating. Everybody has certain values, certain norms. And by choosing certain foods, you signal to other people around you what type of values you want to portray. I don't eat animals. I do eat animals. I only eat fish. I only eat vegetables. That's a thing to identify yourself. And it also has dripped into our culture because food is very emotional. Sharing dinner with your family, how you want to host somebody coming to your house. And new food always has this tension in society because where does it fall? What does it say about you? And also, especially what's very high on the value list of people, is this good for me? Is what I'm eating still good for me? And with new things, it's always the question. They're always a bit wary. And they like the nostalgic feeling of a farmer that raises his own cattle or grows his own crops, and in this people call natural way, which is strange because natural is not really a thing, and everything you see around us is not natural. But it's still they do still do like to feel that way. And that's how lawmakers can interplay in that tension role, saying, oh yeah, so side with me because I care about these values, side with me because I care about the other values. And unfortunately, cultivated meat has become a point of attention to a lot of people since, we see, especially in Europe, some conservatism coming up, I think also in the States. And that's where you see also the divide in society. To be fair, since it's such a young field and the amount of product that we can produce as a field is small compared to the entire field. I cannot please everyone. And I'm not here to tell you what not to do or you should do. I'm just here to provide an alternative. I've seen in society that telling people what not to do doesn't seem to be working out, but providing them with alternatives that adhere to their values or things that they desire seems to move people in the right direction. The best example I have for this is electric cars. 2 decades ago, nobody knew about electric cars. Nobody ever saw an electric car, which is strange because actually the first cars were electric. Infrastructure was a problem. But then suddenly this new company comes about and then sexy new car that still fulfills the need. And the need is, I want to go from A to B quite comfortably, preferably. And around, well, we do kilometers, so it's about 120 kilometers per hour. That's about the sweet spot that we want to do. And then suddenly you have this thing that you can show to people that you care about the environment, but it also looks cool and it gets you from A to B. So that's a jackpot. And that's the same thing that we want to do. We are producing a new way, but still fulfill the need. I want to eat meat. I like meat. I enjoy eating meat. It's delicious. But I do care about either animal welfare, environment, and antibiotic resistance. So eat this option, which still fills the need, which is meat, but then without the harmful effects. So you have to find your audience. You have to find the audience, but also talk to regulators that you're not against somebody here. You're not against farmers. You're not against ways of production. It's just an alternative.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel, there's massive misinformation out there in terms of how it is produced, but also I feel, and I've spoken to several farmers, that if you frame the conversation as this is not an us against them kind of thing, but in a future with all the issues and the problems that you're facing with climate, why not potentially have also part of your farm, a lab where you can, grow meat and diversify your revenue stream? And if you frame it as that potentially as something that is, good for them economically, that works, right? Like trying to find, a more inclusive path. And how do you guys, I know the Netherlands are definitely more forward looking than other places in Europe on this, but how do you frame the possible attacks, let's say, of misinformation or, all the stuff that it's like hormones and antibiotics that in reality are not there?
I think the antidote to misinformation is information and transparency. And we haven't been doing a good job at that. I think companies in this space, since they're very young, still developing, have been not as willing or open to share their progress or stuff that they're working on. Part of it is the pursuit of patents and intellectual property, of course, but that's until a certain point, right? Then if you have those, you should start talking about, hey guys, this is how it's actually being done. This is the list. This is the papers that we're publishing. That is, I think, the next step for these fields, so that nobody can ever point in us and say stuff that's not true, because then we'll have empirical evidence saying, well, that's not actually the case because we have peer-reviewed evidence here, and this is how we are doing certain things. You can critique that, that's fine, but don't say stuff that's not wrong. And I think that's the next phase where this field should be moving towards, since we haven't done that. And then it makes it easy target. If you don't tell people what's going on, I think it's called the Streisand effect.
Yeah.
If you don't tell people what's going on, they assume the worst. They're like, oh, so they're probably hiding something. So that's where now we have to start breaking down walls and be more open and be more transparent with the community. And we are making an effort on that. It's not as easy as a single company to do that. So we have made a trade association in Europe to come together and start discussing on how we want to do this, because several companies have different approaches. And so what do we agree on telling everybody on, you don't want to sell one idea how it should be done compared to another, so that other companies are maybe put in a disadvantage. So this is a delicate situation. And I think there's a lot to be learned from the plant-based industry, but also from, crops that are being developed by certain companies, and how they are telling the story that we're not the bad guys here. We just want to make sure everybody has enough to eat, right? That's the only thing that we're trying to do. And if eventually people say, well, I don't want this product, it's up to you. It's a personal decision on what you want to eat and not want to eat. But I think it is my mission to make sure that we have alternatives for the future. And only when you have alternatives, you have a choice.
Yes.
And I think that's important to understand, because, if ask Singaporeans how they think about food security, they want to make sure that when the trucks stop driving, that they don't starve to death. Somebody once told me that there's like 9 meals till your population riots. If you miss 9 meals, things get gnarly. And in Singapore, when you import 90+% of all the food that's being eaten there, if you don't have a choice, somebody will make the choice for you, and that's bad. You want to make sure you have options and then decline an option. That's also fair. But you need to create options first before you can get into that decision making.
And that, I think, is something that we've seen a lot, right? Like countries where there are food security issues, like Singapore or the MENA region, that they are heavy import dependent, are streamlining these kind of technologies. And instead, countries that are, look at the US. We have land.
Agricultural powerhouse in the world. Absolutely. The Netherlands as well. Closest second. Yes, we're very good with greenhouse technology, and our tomatoes, cucumbers, and onions are incredible production powerhouses.
Oh, definitely. And it's difficult when you are established, I would say, have no need in a way, which is not true in my opinion, because with climate change, we will see a lot of changes in Europe and the US as well. But I would think, what are the biggest misconceptions that you have seen, whether on a regulatory or even consumers, like that we were talking before, driving that right message, and how do those specifically you are trying to address, or how can they be addressed?
It's hard. That's an interesting question, since I'm in such a bubble. Sometimes I think that everybody knows about cultivated meat. Because everybody that I talk to knows about cultivated meat, but they probably know about cultivated meat because I talk to them. So I feed them information saying, hey, this is how we do things. And of course, if you get it from the source, there's little room for misinformation. So I haven't seen much absolute misconceptions that are applicable to us. Some people claim that we're using malignant cells that may grow out of control. That's one that I can think of, which is absolutely not true. It's already hard enough to keep these cells alive as it is. Cells are very delicate when you remove them from an animal. So you treat them as royalty. So you pamper them a lot. So we have to be careful that they just don't die on us. So that's also a strange misconception. And for the rest, I nearly cannot think of anybody because it's I don't know. Maybe because I'm just so deep into it that I don't realize what conceptions or misconceptions are alive outside.
I'll give you one.
Please.
They call it fake meat or synthetic meat. And usually what I say is not fake and it's not synthetic. right? But can you address that?
Yeah. So nomenclature has been a thing in this field for a long time. Also because there's a lot of different languages, and the Dutch word for cultivated meat is not as flattering, but it's stuck. So we cannot do anything about it. But the wording is mostly used to discredit the fields. So it's not necessarily misinformation. It's just a way of describing it. And sometimes people don't know what it is. And it's like, okay, so wait, is it not made of plants, but it's made of an animal? So yeah, it's made from an animal, but no animal slaughter. So it basically this word that they're using that there's underlying just lack of knowledge. I think that's mostly not necessarily misinformation, but just lack of the information needed to formulate the right phrasing for it. Because if I talk to somebody and they call it fake meat, and I say, why would you think it's fake? It's like, it doesn't come from an animal. And I say, yes, it does. Well, no animal has to be killed for it. Yeah, but it's still made of the same stuff that the animal is made of. So what is exactly fake about this? And very rapidly you come into this conversation where people are like, okay, but what do you mean by it comes from an animal? It's like, well, it literally, I go to an animal and take a piece of it. And okay, I understand that. So it really is this gradual process. 2 or 3 questions in that people start to realize that it's different. And they do feel maybe sometimes uneasy about it, but they also come to a realization that there's a lot of benefits to it. There's a famous study by Cor van Wele, which is a Dutch sociologist that did very early work on understanding people's perception of cultivated meat. And he saw the same thing happening over and over again. People, lack of knowledge, were weary of it, didn't know what to name it. Couple of questions into the conversation and explaining what it is, you see this gradual process. And people still might come out the other side saying, okay, I understand it's not fake or synthetic meat, but I still won't eat it because it doesn't feel good for me. You very rapidly go into this emotional state, what feels good for you or doesn't feel good for you, where you're comfortable with or uncomfortable with. But then at least the understanding that this is not a threat, this is not dangerous, this is not unhealthy for you.
Definitely. And I think that's how we should, right? Always talk that it's more natural than one's perception is.
Yeah. It's a bit cheesy, but that's why the slogan, the new natural for our company, I think has resonated, because we're just using nature's own ability to create the stuff that we always wanted, only now in a different way. And we have been doing that since humans made fire, right? Like, okay, well, we like to be warm. So we light this stuff on fire so that's nice for us. So we're changing the nature to our benefit. And then you can see the progress. It's the most natural thing to do for people to come into an environment and say, well, we don't really like it here. It's a bit too cold or a bit too hilly, or, I need to move faster from one end to another. So we'll just make roads, or we build houses in this cube shaped stuff and build concrete. So it's so natural for people to take now this step into a new, I would say, a new agricultural revolution. Since from hunters, gatherers to farmers, that was a rocky road that we got ourselves into. And now we're taking that one step further after industrialization of agriculture. Now we're taking, okay, so let's break down again how we think about producing food, what we can do to better fit our needs, and then spare the environment in the same way, because that's the new realization that we have, that industrial agriculture has its limits and also puts pressure on the environment. How can we still use that to move forward and create food, but without the pressure on the environment?
I also think people, I would say, bigger companies have been very good in making you think that the meat that you eat is all natural, like you have cows grazing in a pasture on top of a mountain.
Yeah. The Austrian cow in the mountains, right?
And you're like, well, small percentage,
Absolutely.
but not really what you get in a supermarket.
But it's also a bit willfully ignorant, right? Because I doubt that I would go on the street right now and say, hey, you know where your meat comes from? And they're like, yeah, I think so. So they do know. They did everything in their power to put up the curtain, make it square cubes into a styrofoam pack. There's no association anymore with the original animal. And you see the gradient happening there in species.
Yeah.
We care about mammals a lot because we are mammals. So that's why we make cubes of it, to remove the mammalian effect of it. If you go to a fish market, there's an entire fish on ice looking at you, and we're perfectly comfortable with that. And then with chickens, like, we're on this halfway zone because you can get the carcass, and that's also still fine. Chicken carcass or turkey carcass, fine. But when it comes to mammals, very rarely we take the entire animal. We need to dissect it a bit more. Of course, it's also it's a bit hard to get an entire cow, right? It's very heavy. But still, you can see the comfort on where we care about, what we feel unease with, and how then the industry helps us become easy with the consummation of it, because it's more detached from reality.
Definitely. So I want to ask you a little bit about, obviously, Meatable, and you guys have, I mean, I think just in the past year, I don't even know how many articles I wrote about you guys, news that came out, and you've done tremendously, both having your first tasting in the Netherlands or in Singapore. Can you talk a little bit about the differences and the complexities, I would say, and how you guys are navigating the challenges like between Europe, US, and Southeast Asia?
Yeah. You should stop me when I get too technical, because this is my hobby horse, right? I'm a cell biologist. So if you ask me, hey, how do you do stuff? I have a 2.5 hour lecture that I can guide you through, but I'll spare you the intricate details. I'll give you in a nutshell version of it, because I think it's important to understand that not all methods for cultivated meat are the same. There are ways of doing this because cells have rules. You cannot just wish upon a star that a cell from an animal does what you want it to do in the most optimal way that you want it to do. So you have to work in the boundaries of what mammalian cells or animal cells can do for you. And if you take different cells from an animal, you have skin cells, liver cells, and also different types of stem cells, because stem cells is a very broad category, and there's gradients there as well. So when you're starting a cultivated meat company, you have to decide, what cell do I start with? Because it will dictate what innovations you have to do to make a cost-effective large-scale process. And at Meatable, we have decided to use a very unique cell type. It's called a pluripotent cell, with a very fancy word. And what this means that this cell is very early in its developmental stage. I was once a pluripotent cell. You were once a pluripotent cell, believe it or not. Look at us now. We've come a long way, but the potential that this cell has is to multiply many-fold over, right? It can grow tremendously and has the ability to turn into any cell type that resides in your body. We, of course, are most interested in the muscle and the fat, because that's the things that we consume. So we have to innovate on a way to steer these cells using the natural toolkit that these cells have, because pluripotent cells do become muscle and fat cells. Look at an animal, look at our bodies, they have the ability to do this. But then we just had to find a way to coach them into that direction. And it's not easy, because cells are very complex and they have a lot of different needs and signals, to get in and out. And you need to understand how that works. But we are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? It's 2024. We do crazy stuff in labs and development, so that we could learn from that. We could learn from so many fields. We can learn from the industrial biotech. We can learn from cell biotech. So we took all these things together, and then we developed this methodology to turn these cells very rapidly into muscle and fat. And that's the unique combination: a cell type that can grow very well on very large scale, and a methodology to turn them rapidly into muscle and fat, the stuff that we like. Other players use sometimes cells that are a bit further in their development, so very close to the muscle and fat that they want. But then longevity of these cells becomes an issue, because the more specialized you are, the less multiplication potential you have. So that's the gradient. Either you pick cells that can grow very well, very hard to turn into the cells that you eventually want, or you take cells that are close to the cells that you want, but you need to make sure that they grow enough for the final production. So that's what we've been focusing on pork meat first, since the methodology that we developed resonated more with that species. We don't know why, but we also now have stepped into cow meat as well. But first to market will be pork fat. So this is how that went. We started with thinking like, okay, bovine and pigs, those are the two things that we're focusing. Okay, let's do that one first, because we only have so many resources and so many people. All right, pork, muscle, fat. All right, we see a little bit better traction in the fat. Okay, let's go for that first, because that's where all the effort should go to get product to market first, navigate the regulatory landscape. You already alluded to it. It's pretty hard to do, especially for a new company like us. Get that to market first, scale it up, bring costs down, provide a dossier to regulatory agencies, and see if we can get to market, and then fill in the rest. Then it will be pork muscle, bovine fat, bovine muscle, and then see what else is on the menu, literally and figuratively. This is like the sequence of events that we went through. And we're now at this very exciting stage that we're probably going to enter the market fairly soon. We're looking specifically like Singapore. That's why I mentioned they're very open and welcoming to this type of innovation since the food insecurities, but also to other jurisdictions, because I think meat is such a global product that anybody that understands that, we need diversification is looking at this as a solution. So that's what the next thing we've been doing, just scouting jurisdictions, maybe the Americas, maybe the rest of Asia. Europe does seem to be a little bit more conservative. It's unfortunate that the EFSA is in Italy, because Italy has been very outspoken about cultivated meat. Italians, of course, are known for their high quality of food, delicious food, but also their conservatism about food. I don't know if you ever tried breaking pasta in front of an Italian. Wouldn't go very well.
I am Italian.
Oh, so if I would break some pasta like in half before I put it into the pan, I think you will feel something about that, right?
Yeah. But I also recognize that that's exactly what you said, which is what I said before. Your perception of this great food is not what we have today. So yes, in Italy, you have the possibility to go and get the butter from, the mountain and all of that. And I drive and I go get my butter once a year. I get I don't even know how many kilos, and I bring it back, and the color is different. But if you go to the supermarket, that's not what you're getting.
No, it's not.
If you want fruits and vegetables, that's not where you get it.
I completely agree. But that said, if you want to feed 8 billion people, driving to mountains doesn't seem to be very practical, does it?
No, not at all.
But that's in the landscape. And Europe, I think we see that the Nordic countries are progressive. It seems like it's everywhere, even within countries, that north through south, doesn't matter the size of the country, that there's always differences in culture and behaviors.
Oh, yeah.
And especially in Europe, they called it the tomato line or the wine beer line. So you can draw like a line through Europe, like halfway around France, and then they will start drinking wine, and top part will drink beer, or down will be potatoes, and the top will be potatoes, the bottom will be potatoes. It's just very roughly cultural line that you can see in food culture and certain preferences over food.
And that is it. I mean, I do obviously a lot of advocating. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. So obviously I advocate for more climate friendly solutions, but definitely what, I would like to see in Europe. And I think that's where the conversation needs to change, is really with the farmers, right? Like all these bans and stuff. I'm like, why are you having a ban now? It's not like we're going to eat it tomorrow. Oh yeah, let me just go buy my, A, it's not really cost effective. B, it's not really there. So why are we doing it now?
Yeah, it's a bit of a red herring. What we have done in the past months, and I think it's a pretty bold move, but I think it will play out pretty well. We've got a new CEO on board, Jeff Strapician. He's also Italian. He's now in the States, and he has had a long-lasting career in the animal husbandry industry. And having that as a bridging function for him to be able to reach out on both sides of the aisle is going to be critical. We also even have rethought our business model. Instead of developing or building factories ourselves, it's very expensive, very cumbersome. Doing it for the first time is very difficult. Why not lend out or stretch out a hand to the existing industry, saying, hey, you got the capital, you're making good money, you know how to build big plans. Why don't we collaborate? That we will be providing what we are good at, which is technology, methodology, and you will help with building a factory around that technology that can support that, so that we can integrate instead of being separate and having that combat narrative around us. And we have had a lot of positive conversations around that proposal. It's staggering that they're like, yeah, that does make sense, especially if you realize that food supply chains are wild. The amount of food that we produce and the way that's being transported over the world is nothing short than a miracle. Just go to a supermarket the next time and become mindful to your environment and look around you on how much food is in there. Every shelf is packed.
Yeah.
And realize that there's storage in the back with more products. And then realize that it's every day that it's packed. And it's not that only that supermarket, it's every supermarket that's filled to the brim. It is a testament to human progress that we have so much food right now. I think I don't know if I'm misquoting or I heard this number wrong. I don't want to spread misinformation, but it resonated for me a lot that somebody said to me, we're now currently in a state of the world where people are suffering from too much to have to eat than too little. Of course, there's still, I think, 800 million people that go to bed hungry by food insecurities. But if you see the obesity epidemic and the diabetic epidemic, that, it's a luxury position if you look at the big perspective of human history.
Oh, yeah. There was a study, literally just that in, 2030, the percentages of obesity will be through the roof, as well as obviously we know that we waste as much food as we could feed, 2 billion people with the food that we waste, right?
Crazy.
So on one end, in the conversation around malnutrition, which is obviously like what brings all these diseases. So I think the conversation needs to be a little bit more balanced and holistic. But going back to what you were saying, I think there needs to be a lot more inclusivity and with the existing industry to say this could be a win-win situation, right? Where you bring new, but you have the existing infrastructure help you out. And how do you guys are looking at cost? Because obviously that is definitely one of the barriers of the industry today. I don't think it's going to be like that forever. I am a big believer in cultivated proteins, but how are you tackling that today?
It is what I mentioned before. I think that it's hard to compete with an industry that has been around for more than a century. I don't know where you want to put the flag on when we did industrial animal rearing, but it will always in the beginning be more expensive because we're at this productivity peak. Like, optimize the supply chain, optimize the production, the infrastructure around it, and then suddenly we're coming with this new. And the only way, if you want to move to another peak, which may be higher, you don't know that yet, but if you want to move to another peak, the only way to get there is first to go down. Right? First, less productivity, and then you need to build your way up again. And that's where we at as an industry. It's very expensive right now still because we're not producing a lot of volume, but this is a volume game. The more you buy of a certain thing, the cheaper it becomes, especially when it comes to the nutrients that we feed the cells, especially when the equipment that we're using, and especially with the intensification of the process. So it's really this balancing act that you want to increase the output of your system while you're reducing the cost of it. And those sometimes are mutually exclusive. So you try to find the sweet spot in there. So how we go about it is by this iterative loop, which is, I think, unique to cultivated meat when it comes to the sense of optimizing a food self, is that we have so much control and understanding of what the cells consume and what they need that we can do this feedback loop by adding a little bit more or removing a little bit from the stuff that they eat, which are like the sugars and the salts and amino acids, because, cells don't have a digestive system anymore. So you break it down to these building blocks. It's basically Gatorade with whey protein, right? That's how you should think about it. But then, of course, not from animal sources. And then optimize that. Like, how much food does the cell need to still grow optimally, still produce the fat, still produce the muscle that we want? And this will take some time. So it's this gradual process. And if you see where we started off with, the first burger was priced at 250,000 euros. And now I think not too long ago, a study came out that we're down in the tens of euros. So that's huge, right? In only a decade, people got so impatient that every year's a new iPhone. Why can't we just not have cultivated meat right now? Yeah, it just takes a bit. Unfortunately, you have to be a little bit patient. And we're now balancing that because the financial markets, of course, have soured a little bit. So we're a bit in hot weather. We see some unrest in the field that some people hasn't progressed as fast as they hoped to. And then now getting access to capital is a bit more tight. So this will be the natural part of the innovation cycle. If you Google innovation cycle, you can see in the beginning always a big streak of hype. Everybody's excited. Same with AI. If I would rebrand the company AI right now, maybe I'll get some funding. But even there, you will eventually see companies going under because not everybody can win. That's the unfortunate truth. And also with the computer industry, with the .com bubble, also with the AI bubble, we are going through that, right? A lot of companies come in, they try to develop something new. Some will make it, some won't. And then you see this downturn. And then the companies that have pulled through that valley and have something of value will rise after this. And they call this the shakeout. And then the realization of truth and technology will then flourish afterwards. And that's where we are. We're just getting back from the bottom because we see products coming into market, people collaborating now suddenly more. Even within the industry, people looking at each other saying, hey, better strung together, since we are maybe developing something that looks very much similar to what we're doing in our own respective companies. So it's this natural cycle that sometimes people forget that this happens, right? It's every time like, oh, how did this happen? Well, if you look in the past, these things happened before. This is not new. And then AI will go through a similar thing, which then also people will be surprised and be saying, oh, scandalous, we thought this was going to be our savior. And now, unfortunately, these companies won't make it. Like, yeah, guess what? This happened before. But it's interesting times. It's interesting times to navigate, especially when you're coming from it's never easy to raise money. Investors are not idiots. They're not just willy-nilly giving people money.
Oh, yeah.
To sell the story. Because there was a lot of knowledge missing from the industry, right? When I started the company in 2018, most of the thing I was doing was educating people on what a sell is. Some investors said, what do you mean? Like in Excel? It's like, no, not in Excel. It's like this physical thing that you're also made of. Oh, okay. And then really going through that journey, explaining again what I told you. Not all cells are equal in their performance or characteristics. And this is what the benefits are on this side. It's what are the benefits on that side or the drawbacks. And then navigating that till now, there's a big pool of understanding. You really have seen in the past 5 years, also the publications, scientific publications. Academia has also started to support that. We had a project here in the Netherlands called the Grow Fund, which is a government instrument to support new upcoming industries with education and research in universities. So we're also now only seeing that happening. So we're so early on in our understanding and our development towards large scale processes that have impact on a global scale that it's this very slow moving progress, at least when you're looking at it from a technology perspective. And maybe we also overpromise a little bit. I think that the industry did do that. Too fast, too much bravo. We're going to save the world. No. This is food and this is hard. I wish it was rocket science because, there have been people on the moon. Cultivated meat on a large scale has never been done. So at least I don't have a flag in the future that I can say, well, these guys have done it before. So I'm very confident that it will become reality. Only the question is when.
No, definitely. I think also what we've seen is a lot of self-adjusting, at the beginning, like with fetal bovine serum and right. Like, and then, like, okay, we cannot do this or it's not sustainable for ethical reasons. And, you're always trying to improve like growth factors and so forth. And I think and I'm not a scientist, this is my external point of view, is that because it is so young, it's a learn curve kind of thing, right? You adjust.
And also very fragile, I've noticed that ideas are harmless. So if you have a new idea and you throw it into the arena, man, it will get some bruises, right? Sometimes you get a punch in the face because apparently you didn't understand the full landscape or you run into something that you didn't expect. These things happen. But then, of course, it's our job as scientists or as innovators to overcome these hurdles. No scientific reason why this wouldn't work. And I've been doing this for a decade. So by now, I came across more things and people said, oh, you will never be able to do X. You're never able to do Y. Guess what? We are doing X and Y at the moment. So it is not easy. It's still a long road ahead of us. But we've proven every time that these things can work. A lot of people were naysayers.
Oh, yeah. And what does the future look like for Meatable in the next 5-10 years?
I think the biggest one for us will be finding that partner that does trust the future, that says, yeah, I do see the synergies here. I do see the collaboration here. And then for us to work together to build the first proof of the factory that we're envisioning. I think that will have to happen in the next 5 years to still retain some of the trust. Of course, we have some successes with Vow, and of course, there's some other companies in the US that are still producing, but more companies will have to start entering that space. Else it will stay niche, else it will stay gimmick. And when you see big industrial players coming in, then suddenly you're like, okay, if they think that's a potential future, then suddenly the trust builds again. And also then leaning on these guys a little bit for their expertise and their know-how. I think with the field has to be humbled a little bit to just ask for help. I think that's the next phase. So that's finding a partner, moving forward with the development, and then building something of value where we can start saying, hey, look, this is our landing on the moon moment. There it is. You can visit. Maybe I should wear like this top hat and do like golden tickets as a Willy Wonka. Like, hey, come on over. You can check this out, how this works. And I'm more than happy to tell you exactly how it works. I think that is then the moment where we see another revival of this field happening.
Right. So last couple of questions. One is, how do you envision the balance between cultivated meat, plant-based fermentation, and traditional meat? How it evolved and how it is, let's say 10, 15 years from now.
10, 15 years, nothing much will change. Such a short period of time. Building a factory takes about 2.5 to 3 years. So that's like 3 factory cycles that you can build in that time. It's not a lot, especially if a factory is about, Matt, I hope I get this number right or else my team will kill me. I think it's like 10 kilotons of a single performance line. Like if you say, like, bioreactor and tanks and everything, and then you can do multiple of that, of course, but then that's what we're envisioning for the first plant is like 10 kilotons. That's not a lot when you think about 350 million tons that is being produced every year. So this is a slow, gradual process. And that's why it's a very natural growth cycle where we'll have more installed capacity. Maybe we see we will be happy if we can only get part of the increased demand for the next couple of decades, because that is staggering. The FAO predicted that in the next, I think, 30 years, we have a 70% increased demand in animal protein.
Oh, yeah.
It's 70% more of the 350 million. So we're just trying to make sure that we can stifle the growth with our alternatives. That will be, for me, already a huge win because those numbers will be massive. So that will come first. And then we have to do everything in our power to diversify, like I said. Less meat, more plant options, cultivated options, maybe even foods that we are not thinking of right now. I think the more choice you have in food, the better it will be for humanity at large.
Especially like when I got into this, it was before 2015. And I remember the expo, 10 billion people by 2050. And then the more you work around, it's like, okay, 80% of all arable land is used for feeding animals. How does that make sense?
It does. It's very hard to look at that and you're like, oh yeah, that's not going to work out fine, just fine. No, so also that trip, our CEO says, like, they know this is the case. They know. So they're slow moving as well, and they have incentives, but it's slow moving. But for me, the biggest victory moment that I will probably retire, I don't know if I will retire, but I'll do something different, is that I have a 2-year-old daughter and I have a son coming in probably like a week. This is exciting. I do think that having a child is a vote for her and confidence in the future. And then having them together when we're doing grocery shopping, and there will be like cultivated meat that we produced. And then I can post it as, hey, daddy helped with making that. And then they're like, what? Yeah, what do you mean? Yeah. What are you talking about? And then, yeah, that would be so much fun.
Oh, yeah. I have one more question. It's a question I ask to all of my guests. If, I'm giving you a magic wand. Here's the wand. If you could do or change anything with this wand, what would it be?
Does it have to be cultivated meat related?
No.
I would abolish professional European soccer, so football. I think it's so corrupt and people get paid for kicking a ball. Like, I think there was a transfer like 55 million for kicking a ball. Like, oh my God, the amount of good I could do with that money. and the violence that comes accordingly with it. And also the World Cup where they do it in Qatar with all the people dying, or also in some other countries where they just break laws and just say, hey, now we've wrong. I just can't look at this sport in the way that it currently is and say, oh, this does not good in the world. That will be my magic. I like to do this with my friends because they're big football fans and always ruffles their feathers. Like, you're full of it. And man, I just let people enjoy their things. I'm all for that. But why does it have to be so corrupt? Why did these guys get paid so much? Yeah, it's a free market, but still, come on.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, but that's it. I'm going to get in trouble for this for sure.
Right.
Waiting for the comments.
Yeah, look, I have one pet peeve. So yes, I'm Italian. I'm also American. I don't watch a lot of Italian politics, but I do consume American politics at an obscene level. And I don't see why someone with 88 counts, twice impeached, rapist is actually going in the White House. Corruption to the core.
It's so sad that we're now in a day and age that it's very hard for me to point towards a leader like on a big scale that I can say, oh yeah, I want to be that guy. Or I think those values are good. It's got so hard to find role models that we can aspire or look up to. That it's because it's sometimes very sad to realize that I've nobody that I can hang up. Like I'm from a '90s kid that I have a poster on my wall and that says yes, that's the guy I want to do. There's just too few of them. Of course, there are probably somewhere to find. Weird one that I found was Akon, like the rapper. That guy does good because he wanted to help his mother and his mother didn't want to leave the country. So instead he developed things like electricity and build a better environment for that. I'm like, yeah, that's doing good. That's doing good with your money. And probably there are thousands of examples, but why are these guys not put on a pedestal?
Yeah. And I think that you see that in a little bit with celebrities and stuff like that, right? And you don't see a lot of politicians, but I think that goes back to education. We have a lack of good education nowadays. Our attention span just got shorter and shorter.
Be the change that you want, right? Be the change that you want. And one of the things that people also tell me is that tend to the garden you can touch. Tend to the garden. That I cannot change the world, at least from the other side, but I can change what I have over here. And if I have the opportunity to do good, then you should. I tell this now when I go do lectures at universities that you are the guys that have to do this, right? Do you think somebody currently in Ethiopia is going to develop cultivated meat right now, that he has the means to do that, or the environment that is helping them to succeed? We're very privileged that we have these opportunities. And I think we have an obligation to utilize it to the maximum effort and to do the most good in this world that you can. This is this Japanese phrase called ikigai, something that you're good at, something that the world's need, something that you can make money with, and something that you love doing. And then you find something that you can wake up for every day of the week.
I would end with that note because it was a beautiful thought.
It was a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for the great questions. I really, truly enjoyed it.
Thank you. Want to deep dive into food innovation? Subscribe to the Food Tech Junkies series. Tune in and listen to the industry's champions, whose mission is to reinvent our future by collaborating and disrupting the status quo as a way to rebalance our planet and our daily lives. For more great food and ag tech content, visit our website at www.edibleplanetVentures.com, and don't forget to follow us on social media.